In this video, we're going to look at the objectives from Section 5 of the Professional Horizon 7.7 examination 2019. And Section 5 is all about configuring and using the User Environment Manager. Now, there's a couple of things that I always try to remember about the User Environment Manager that helps me when I'm trying to answer questions on that subject. And the first one is that the process that's carried out by User Environment Manager is to decouple the user settings from the application. So that's basically what it does. It takes all these user registry settings effectively and sort of manages them. And the second thing is that it has no database. So bearing in mind these two things helps you work out what would happen in terms of questions. So one of the first things that comes up in the objectives, there should be no surprise, is the configuring and use of shares. So it would be a good idea to get to understand the use of the shares as opposed to a database and understand what each of these shares contains, what it does, so that if you were asked a question about the location of a file, for example, you would know which of these shares it's likely to be in. And also it would be a good idea to understand the security requirements for these, just in case over-restrictive security perhaps causes any issues. And of course, something that is used quite extensively as well is group policy objects and group policy object templates. You can imagine that for these registry settings, the group policy objects are used extensively. So you could find that there are questions around where they are, what they do. I would say that as far as managing them is concerned, as long as you remember the phrase "you are managing templates," then within the management UI you should be able to get to managing the group policy object templates quite easily. And of course, in the day-to-day use of it, you're going to be expected to understand the steps involved with creating an application configuration, for example. So it'd be a good idea to practice with this and get to know the component parts that can be affected by this. For example, folder redirection and even application blocking. Remember, these are things that can be done with this, so good to get an understanding of these. Once you have that in place, how do you maintain it? How do you work with its life cycle? So that's modification of it, creating condition sets within it. It'd be a good idea for you to understand within condition sets what can be used, things like IP addresses and things like that. Even time of day can be used within condition sets. You can also have triggered tasks. So it'd be a good idea for you to remember what might trigger a task, so that if you're asked a question where the answer is a condition set or a triggered task, then you know what each of these can do, so that you know which of these might be the most useful. And a couple of component parts quite useful for you to get to know: the application profiler. So get to know what the application profiler does in terms of extracting the configuration from applications, and exactly what happens then as a result of it extracting that information. And also the help desk support tool. Get to know what it is that can actually be done by the help desk support tool on behalf of a user. So I've got a few documents that are worthwhile having a look at. So the first of these documents is the User Environment Manager Administrator's Guide. And this can be quite useful for us. If we scroll down through the chapters, we see here we have chapter 2, planning your deployment. If we take that option, we find that we have a list of all the components. So there's a Flex engine, there's Flex configuration, there's archive paths and things like that. So all of these good pieces of information are available to us right at the very start of chapter 2. If we then look at 3.6 here, we can see here the console configuration. And this console configuration is effectively the starting point for working with the user environment manager. So if you were asked a question about the initial configuration, for example, then you would know this is where you would go. And of course, there's lots more there in this document for us. If we have a look at chapter 1, for example, there is the application configuration, user environment settings, very important thing that you can modify for the user. You might be asked about application migration. So it's all there and ready for you as well. There's one other thing I'm going to search for here. I'm going to search for help desk. Help desk. And what we see here is that in this section we can look at the help desk support tool, and it takes us through how to configure the support tool and what the support tool can do. This is just really a sort of starting point for it, because what we also have is a full document on the subject. So we can see, get an introduction to what the help desk support tool does for us, and how to use the tool as well. So I'm quite sure that you'll get a question in some way about the help desk support tool, so well worth reading that. And of course the application profiler as well. I don't think there'll be quite so many questions about the application profiler, but understanding what it does in terms of extracting the configuration information from an application would be helpful and useful to answer any potential questions that you have. If we look, see how many pages this is, we find it's about 20 pages, so it might be worthwhile having a skim read through that. So this video has been about section 5 in the objectives, configure and manage the user environment manager. In the next video we're going to turn our attention to section 6, which is where we start to look at app volumes. So we'll have a look at how do we install and configure app volumes, and how do we manage app stacks and writable volumes.